So senior officials are sounding the alarm in Russia, with the chief economist saying, quote, "We won't win the competition in this war of attrition. We're under the illusion that everything in Ukraine will collapse, but it hasn't, and it won't. Our costs are mounting." Now, he was fired 2 days after the speech was made public, so let's get into what he said and what's looking like major problems headed Russia's way in the very near term. In fact, it's serious enough that a few guys we're going to quote today are referencing past collapses and revolutions as examples. So let's get into it. Now, starting out, we've got an article here in the Moscow Times, all of these sources, of course, linked in the description below, where they quote a speech given by Andrei Klepok, the chief economist at a Russian state-run bank that finances infrastructure projects across the country. This speech was given in May. It was reported on and made public August 14th. 2 days later, August 16th, he was fired, officially for disciplinary reasons, but we even have Russian sources saying, it's because he said something the Kremlin didn't want to hear. And to be fair, the assessment here is pretty dark, but it does match what we see from the outside looking in. Like if you kind of move past all of the propaganda and the smoke shields, this passes the common sense test. Klepok says, quote, "We're falling behind. We're losing both the technological and economic competition globally. And as I've already said, we're losing not only to China and the United States, but in some ways we're losing to Ukraine. Ukraine's economy, of course, is partially destroyed. It's a demographic disaster. But once again, the Ukrainian economy, despite everything, is surviving. Of course, there's enormous financial assistance there. And with this assistance for military spending and their own expenses, it's roughly 50% of our budget." Now, a few different things to break out there. First off, talking about falling behind in the competition, we can see this clear as day. And a lot of this we can see. It's just hard to identify exactly what the impact is today. But the example I'll use right out the gate is AI. Love it or hate it, it is driving a lot of economies around the world right now. The major AI competition is between the US and China. Russia's not in that conversation at all. I mean, you can spread it out to other technologies that are market driving and changing the way people live. When was the last time anything came out of Russia, right? Like they are spending a lot of money. A lot of that money is going into their wartime economy and is paying the salaries of the soldiers, paying the death benefits. Sometimes it's paying for new bombs, new artillery pieces. Meanwhile, the rest of the world continues on without Russia. That's one of the aspects here the economist is talking about. I don't think that is too hard to argue. The second part here, talking about the budget. Ukraine's budget reaching 50% of Russia is a shocking number to hear, especially from a Russian economist. Very hard to parse out exact expenditures of any country during wartime. But if we go back as an example to 2021, before the full-scale war began, you're talking about a 7x multiple. Russia was spending 7 times more than Ukraine on an annual basis. For that number to go from 7x to 2x means probably an increase in Ukraine, probably a decrease in Russia, some variation there. Nobody expected that. All right. The Ukrainian economy was supposed to collapse at some point. We're not going to go down the 3-day rabbit hole, but at some point, the Ukrainian economy was not supposed to keep up with this war. And you still hear it day in and day out from random commentators online that it's just a matter of time before the economy collapses and Russia can do whatever they want. It hasn't. In fact, the progress has been in the opposite direction of what Russia would have hoped at the beginning of the war. That is crazy and a major problem for the Kremlin in the continued execution of this conflict. And the last piece here, we can't bypass that a major component of the Ukrainian economy is foreign assistance, right? That's not a secret. These countries proudly describe what they're doing to support the Ukrainian economy that is largely, almost exclusively, a wartime economy right now. There was a graph that came up a couple days ago I want to share that shows how much this has changed in recent years, and it's incredible. It's cool. I wish the United States was playing a bigger role in this. I've been pretty outspoken in that regard. But what we can see from this is spending in terms of financial assistance and military assistance to Ukraine in recent years has been taken over almost exclusively by our European allies. Love it. Great. Love to see them take charge in this. Again, I wish the United States was playing a larger role. We're not, but it's really cool to see our allies stepping into that position. And when we go back to anything NATO related, everybody always looks at the military and says, do we have more bombs? Do we have more missiles? Do we have more aircraft? Do we have more people? And GDP or what countries can spend is always kind of this afterthought. But this article and this kind of assessment should serve as a reminder that the combined economic weight of NATO, of the European Union, of the West, when put against Russia, is a significant tool. All right, we've got economists inside of Russia, chief economists inside of Russia, talking about the possibility of collapse. All right, war's complicated. Economics plays a large part in that, and we're seeing the impact of having major economies stand together with Ukraine against Russia. Now, turning to the Russian response here, I'm always interested in kind of the very pro-Russian accounts that are critical in a way of wanting Russia to succeed, if that makes sense. They don't just complain for the sake of complaining and everything is bad, but also it's not just pure propaganda of Russia is always winning, always advancing, it's inevitable. I'm really interested in the guys that you can tell are Russian nationalists. They want Russia to win this war, but they understand there are problems, so they're going to call them out because they want those problems addressed. Swodky, talking about this, said, quote, talking about the Economist, he was fired, officially for disciplinary reasons, unofficially for speaking his mind, for saying out loud what is kept silent at meetings. Klepak is not a traitor. He's a doctor at the bedside of a sick patient who is obligated to name the diagnosis even if it's cancer. And his dismissal is not a fight against the truth. It is a fear of the truth. But fear is a bad advisor in a time of historical battles. And this is something we've seen in Russia since the beginning of the war, kind of the misrepresentation of how things are actually playing out. In a recent video, we talked about some lies on the Russian battlefield and said that will catch up with you. You can lie about it for a short period of time. Over a long haul, that won't work out well. You can't do that in war. The economy is the same thing, and we're seeing this play out in a couple different directions. Starting on the military side, Azov, the 1st National Guard Corps Azov, released this footage just a couple days ago, striking fuel targets and fuel storage facilities inside the occupied territories that directly impacts operations at the front. They refer to this as Operation Hell 2, saying, quote, a month ago, we warned the occupiers. Azov sees their movements and will strike at the right moment. However, some of the Russian armed forces continued to store fuel in the occupied Donetsk region. The burning dots on the map indicate facilities involved in the storage and supply of fuel to the Russians. Over the past month, these dots have disappeared from the map, and in reality, there is now only scorched earth. Unlike the enemy, the 1st National Guard Brigade Azov does not target civilian gas stations and does not attack the civilian population. However, the infrastructure of the occupying forces will be destroyed without pity. So as you move closer to the front, you're seeing the targeting of logistics and fuel storage that is having an impact on the front line. That is not an immediate collapse, but over time, we should start to see a slow creeping reduction in Russian offensive operations. And we can see on the Russian side, they're constantly trying to war game ways to get around that. But stepping back up to kind of the macroeconomic picture here throughout Russia, how about refineries? The strikes on refineries haven't stopped. And this goes into directly funding the war. Every aspect of this war takes money, from the salaries to the death benefits to moving troops to the front to getting them bullets for their guns. The economist Klepak said, quote, the conflict in Ukraine involving NATO has lasted longer than the Great Patriotic War. That's what they refer to World War II as. And there's no end in sight. Both sides are escalating their attacks, including one on each other's economies. Losses from Ukrainian military strikes on our infrastructure, ports, oil and gas, chemical plants, and logistics, are mounting and are already becoming a significant macroeconomic barrier to Russian economic growth. That's the goal of those strikes, right? You're not going to see one less bomb fall on a Ukrainian city tomorrow because of a strike on a wild berries facility or a strike on an oil depot, but over time that builds, and we are seeing that effect start to take hold. Another mill blogger talking about, a Russian commentator, Yuri Barachik, got that wrong. Again, we'll have this assessment linked in the description, talking about these strikes on refineries, said, quote, the attacks on Russian refineries and Novorossiysk can no longer be considered as two separate campaigns. Combined, they create a much more unpleasant system. First, one method of realizing the extracted oil, refining, is disabled, and then the second, export, is restricted. This creates a rather unusual situation. Russia has a buyer, high global prices, and an almost non-existent discount, but its physical ability to take advantage of these circumstances is decreasing. It's a major problem for Russia. They need their oil industry. They need to sell these exports and able to fund their economy in order to fund the war effort as it goes on. Any decrease here, and we have seen a decrease month after month after month, any decrease leads to significant results, and this just gets worse over time. The third piece here is the fuel shortages inside of Russia. This has not gone away. We're still seeing this as a major issue in multiple areas of the country. And this is the type of thing that kind of keeps the citizens in check, keeps them quiet so Putin can continue to wage his war. But when fuel prices go through the roof, or it's just not available, as we're seeing in some areas, you start to lose support of the population. And this is where you start to see some Russian commentators talk about the possibility of revolt, revolution, an uprising. Maxim Kalishnikov says, quote, in short, the enemy has found a weak spot and is exploiting it, fueling a fuel crisis. At the same time, the Russian elite is showing remarkable apathy. In other words, Kyiv and its patrons are hoping to create an ideal storm in Russia in the autumn of this year so that a fuel crisis, a budget deficit crisis, and a possible crisis with the mobilization of reservists all converge on one point. Do you understand why? We're seeing a number of channels talk about that now. We've made videos about the possibility of mobilization, the increased possibility of mobilization coming here in the next couple months. More and more, we're hearing Ukrainians talk about how that's already in place, like it's happening quietly behind the scenes. We've got the economic issues with the budget crisis and now the fuel crisis, all ramping up. All of these things get worse with time, and there's a handful of folks looking at this fall saying this could be a tipping point. Back to the economist, Andrei Klepak, talking about the impact that this is going to have. He said, no one expected the February Revolution. Lenin wrote in December 1916 that we won't live to see it, but he did just a few months later. The situation in the Soviet Union in 1991. We had been moving towards it for a long time and consistently, and everyone understood we were heading towards a crisis, but there was no fatal inevitability that the Union would actually collapse. He says, I believe Russia will not collapse, but I'm almost certain we will reach a social crisis. We won't collapse economically, but our lag will widen with all the ensuing consequences. So again, these economic issues in Russia, that they cannot fight the war without the economy churning along. They cannot fight the war with a civilian population that is rising up because they can't get fuel. They can't drive to the store. Their cars are useless. All of this stuff leads somewhere. And according to a top Russian economist, these things are starting to spiral out of control. He's seen the issues. And in his words, Ukraine is not collapsing, but the cost on Russia is increasing significantly. This is very difficult to predict a timeline on this type of stuff. This fall will be interesting to watch, but no doubt it's having an impact over the long term. Now, as a quick fundraiser update, we were working to support the soldiers operating in the southern direction. They just took part in some clearance operations that got a lot of attention. Made a couple videos here talking about what they did. And we're working to help them out with vehicles, vehicle repairs, and power generation. They've been in a really tough fight, actually more than we really knew because that was all kept under wraps for so long. But a lot of this stuff in terms of equipment needs has really reached a critical level in recent weeks. So we've got patches and signed unit flags available for big donors. And you can hear directly from these guys, Soups and Rohat, in a recent interview we just published yesterday. I'll have that linked in the description below. For more details on the campaign, which is through a registered 501c3 nonprofit, so every donation is fully tax deductible. You can find more details on it at the link in the description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.